Welcome to our Asian Mental Health Book Club. My name is Barbara. I'm a therapist here at Yellow Chair Collective, and today we'll be chatting with Dr. Bianca Mabute-Louie about her book Unassimilable, an Asian Diasporic Manifesto for the 21st Century. Dr. Mabute-Louie is a sociologist and activist whose research focuses on the intersection of race, religion, and politics. In her book, she provides context and history of Asian American sense of belonging and the ongoing pressures to assimilate, and presents the case that we shouldn't assimilate. I am particularly grateful for Dr. Mabute-Louie's work as we're all navigating really rapid social changes and just the increasing exposure of systemic injustices. Her work's been influential to my work as a therapist in helping me to have more knowledge and compassionate understanding of my clients' many different layers. I often say in therapy that we don't exist in a vacuum. We are a product of our environment. And as therapists, I believe that we have a responsibility to call out and address the harmful systems that we all live under: white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, and how they contribute to how we see ourselves, our relationships, and the world around us. So many people have a hard time naming the frustration or the indignance they feel about being reduced to a role or a cog in the machine. And I think reading Unassimilable is so validating to our experiences of trying to get it right, to be both authentic and to be a good human and eventually a good ancestor. So Dr. Mabute-Louie, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks, everyone, for being here on this Thursday night. I'm excited to talk with you all and discuss the book together. But I think to start, I'm going to do a short reading just to ground us. Also, if you didn't read the book, that's totally fine. This is like a little synopsis, I guess. So this is from the first chapter on page 2. I'm just going to read for like a few minutes. But yeah, if you wanted to follow along, this is from the second page. And I mentioned SGV, and so I'm referencing San Gabriel Valley, the ethnoburb that I write about outside of Los Angeles. And then I also reference my popo, which is my maternal grandma. My popo relocated from Hong Kong to join us in SGV when she was in her 70s. When she and her husband prepared to retire and settle down in Hong Kong, he instead decided to start a new family with a woman decades younger whom he'd had a secret affair with for almost 10 years. Without any options and overwhelmed by shame, my popo left her home, her apartment where she raised 3 children with her ex-husband, and her mahjong group in Hong Kong to live with us in San Gabriel. She started over at 70 in a foreign place where she couldn't speak the language, didn't have any peers, and couldn't get around. She was isolated and heartbroken. With barely a kindergarten education, her life ambition was to become a wife and a mother. She loved flaunting how good she was at both roles. In true Cantonese matriarch fashion, she bragged incessantly to her social circles about her husband's and children's accomplishments. Now, with 3 adult children with families of their own, she was not needed as a mother and no longer a wife. She had no purpose. Her ex-husband's affair decimated all status and belonging she held in their community. When I was a child, she would insist, "Your popo has become a useless nothing." It perplexed me because I never saw her that way. But getting left by her husband wasn't her entire story. With the safety net of the ethnoburb, she rebuilt. After living with us for a few years, she moved into her own 1-bedroom apartment on Main Street in Alhambra, a city that neighbored San Gabriel at the heart of the ethnoburb. She walked to 85 degrees every day, where they rang a cowbell whenever a fresh bao came out of the oven. She made friends with Cantonese neighbors in her building, and they started their own mahjong group where they would debrief the latest episode of whichever Canto drama aired on TVB the previous night. She found a Cantonese church and got baptized. She never learned English, drove recklessly in the 99 Ranch parking lot, and didn't give a fuck. She may have confirmed a few stereotypes, but the ethnoburb saved her. She stayed unapologetically herself through the upheavals of divorce and displacement. In the safety net of SGV, she got her groove back. Sometimes my mom would take my popo out of SGV and go window shopping in Beverly Hills, and they would drag me along. As a child, popo outside of the ethnoburb was a frightening, multisensory experience. She always brought her full self. She was large and in charge. She tried to bargain and make deals in Cantonese at Saks. They do not speak Cantonese there. They also do not tolerate haggling there. Her voice and presence were always loud, even and especially when we were the only Asians around. "You don't speak Cantonese? Too bad, and sit tight, because Popo is about to start her diatribe about her cheating ex-husband who you've never met before in a language you don't understand." 626 or 90210, my Popo did not code switch. I, on the other hand, started my PhD in code switching when I was 9 after transferring to an uppity, predominantly white private school. Popo outside of the ethnoburb was an unassimilable tornado that left me in the dust, embarrassed and flustered. Whiteness taught me to be ashamed of her behavior because whiteness is actually terrified of people like my Popo, coming out of the ethnic enclave and daring to assert herself into white spaces. When immigrants like my Popo settle in a place like SGV in mass, white people are so afraid that they need to relocate. It's called white flight. It scares them when we collectively create our own belonging without participating in the traditional, time honored process of assimilation. In ethnoburbs like SGV, white flight occurred because, quote, too many Asians like my Popo arrived, bought property, refused to acculturate, and made it our own. We disturb whiteness and destabilize American respectability politics when we create and thrive in our own systems without them. The ethnoburb flourishes despite not assimilating. In fact, it flourishes because it doesn't assimilate. My popo and the ethnoburb demonstrate that we can create our own power and belonging without learning English, participating in white institutions, and Americanizing. But it is a communal endeavor, one that requires everybody's imagination and care. Unassimilability is not an act of individualism. It is an interdependent community of popos finding each other, helping each other refill their prescriptions, and setting weekly dim sum dates so nobody gets too isolated. I question if my popo could have had our comeback tour if not for the Asian immigrants who came before her and with her, collectively creating their own sense of home in the diaspora through the ethnoburb. As many early Asian immigrants to this country were barred from accessing white institutions, working together to build and protect the ethnic ecosystem was a matter of survival and necessity. Over a century later, unassimilability is the vision I witnessed among my popo and her friends in the ethnoburb, relying on each other in their collective insistence to thrive in their latter years away from their homelands. Unassimilability is about cultivating our own social networks and daring to prosper in America without whiteness. It is our ancestors and elders creating.
Thank you, Bianca. I think that goes into the first thing I wanted to ask you really well, which is just to really briefly explain what it means to be unassimilable. But I think describing your Popo's journey and her attitude and her spirit in just living in SGV, I think you really just encapsulated that unassimilable spirit. Is there anything else that maybe you would like to share about what it means to be unassimilable?
Yeah, I think my popo is like she's not an archetype, but she kind of serves as an archetype because, like,
Yeah.
that's really her. It's not a myth, but it feels like an archetype because it's like that's exactly what I'm writing about. But I will say, I started writing this book in 2021, which was a very different world than where we are now. And at the time, I was specifically writing from a context where we were seeing a spike in anti-Asian hate crimes. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk about race. We were in the wake of Black Lives Matter in many ways, and I wrote it because I was noticing a narrative, a broader narrative in the Asian American movement and space around like proving our Americanness or this narrative of like we don't deserve to be hate crimes because we are good Americans and we're hardworking and we've contributed to this country. And I really was just like, do I want to be American? Like,
Mhm.
do we really want to belong here? And I just felt like at the same time, as I was processing this collective trauma our community was facing, my popo also passed away during that time, like a month before, or the same month as the Atlanta spa shootings, if you all remember. And so I just remember as I was writing her eulogy, it all kind of came together because I was like, she is like this archetype of an Asian American politic of refusal that we do come from historically and politically, and that I and so many others kind of long to see in contrast to this politic of assimilation and belonging and respectability politics. And so, yeah, she kind of really embodies like the political aspirations of the book and the term.
Why is it important for us to be unassimilable?
So I started the book in 2021. By the time it came out, it was 2025. So like last year in the winter. And I think in that time, I only have doubled down more on this politic of refusal and this concept of being unassimilable as an aspiration for us as Asian folks in the US, because if we feel like in maybe 2016, right, with Trump's election, the veil was lifted off, then it was lifted all the way off in 2020 and 2023, post Palestine, post October 7th. It is all out there now. And I'm just like, how can they continue to astound and disgust us? And yet they do, right? Even with like the Epstein file, like so much of this country is so rotten. And so I think with that, like, this message, I feel even more kind of like 10 toes down behind it, because it's like to assimilate in this is to consent to and participate in this violent empire, which we do have to just by nature of paying taxes and being settlers here. But to be unassimilable is to at least take a posture of critique and refusal to participate in the ways that we can. And we could talk about later, like what that might actually look like. But a refusal to go with the program and a refusal to be like the good minorities who not only are pitted against other racial groups, but are used to uphold like our labor, our bodies have been used to uphold this empire since forever. And so I think like with time, the urgency of refusal, of opting out has felt even more urgent. I think about even like choices that movements have called to us to make, like boycotting, like BDS, the movement to boycott companies that profit off of the occupation of Palestine, right? Those are all examples of this politic of refusal and being unassimilable that I was writing about that I feel like has become just even more in the forefront.
Yeah. Well, the book is addressing what it means to be Asian Americans and unassimilate from that, but you're also talking about just so much larger than that, right? Just not consenting to harmful systems that are everywhere in the world. I think we are seeing this shift in kind of the social narrative of what it means to have community, what it means to really
Mm,
be American and be here for each other, and being okay with questioning that. Right? I think
mhm.
that in Asian American like families growing up, I don't know about you, but was for sure some more like praise about being American and kind of this
Mhm.
pedestal of like you'd rather be American than Asian, right?
Yeah.
And like it was really clear that obviously you'd want to assimilate because it means that you will
Yeah.
be successful in the society. But it's like, but do we want to be okay with this society that
Yeah.
profit years off of people's labor and lives and people are dying for our lifestyle to be maintained? Like, are we okay with that once we lift
Yeah.
the veil? Right.
Yeah.
And taking a hard look at kind of our apolitical quote unquote environments
Mm,
that a lot of us Asian Americans tend to grow up in.
mhm.
And again, it's just not a conversation we really have like this social justice narrative that, we are now beginning to understand why we need to be involved. And we are involved even if we think we're not. And like
Yeah.
we are taking a stance even if we think that we are being neutral. Right.
Yeah.
So I really like that in your book, you talk about this idea of belonging to each other and not to America, right? This
Mm,
ideal, like being American, is actually really fragile and built on
mm.
these really harmful systems once again. And so, how do we belong to each other rather than a country that we don't stand by? A lot of its foundations, the way that they handle human lives. What does it look like to you to build community where we do belong to each other rather than a country or an external identity?
Yeah. Well, I first wanted to say I loved what you said earlier of like shifting the narrative from we want to be successful in this system in the society to like what if I'm not okay with this society? And I think there are some ways where people have done that. And I mean, this is like the politics of inclusion, like DEI, right? Where it's like I think of like no shade to Asian Hollywood. I think of like, people like we're gonna create our own. And I understand the urgency and necessity of those spaces. Like we're gonna create our own belonging in these white institutions, but it's like if you just wanna succeed at capitalism, that doesn't change fundamentally
Yeah.
how the system is exploiting you and us and all of us, right? Just because 'cause you're successful at, like, doing the thing that you're excluded from, it doesn't make that thing okay.
Yeah,
And it doesn't mean
absolutely.
that they won't actually dispose of you on a
Yeah.
whim. And so anyways, I think like when you ask the question of what does it actually look like to build a community where, yeah, we belong to each other. I think about that too, where we're not just while those spaces where we carve out like affinity groups, for example, or like employee resource groups, those are all really essential to just survive these systems. I think about liberation as actually thinking independently outside of these systems altogether. So it's thinking about things like, okay, yeah, maybe an ERG or a employee resource group or an affinity group in a workplace or in a school is how we start to organize and how we support each other, how we get each other resources. But if we identify that we actually maybe are being exploited in this workplace and maybe we decide we want to unionize or we go on strike, then how to actually belong to each other, then that means we need to have robust mutual aid networks so that we can actually imagine a life outside of capitalism and outside of being exploited. I think I mean, I look to like a lot of Black abolitionist thinkers and feminists who really have challenged me to not just accept reform or accept trying to work within and make the system as livable as we can, but to really imagine what a true dismantling and a true rebuilding and total reimagining would look like. And so part of that is like reimagining things like work, reimagining things like the classroom and school and identity. I'm trying to think of a more tangible example that maybe people can hold on to, but I think I can talk about a conversation I actually have with my parents a lot. So I talk to my
Mhm.
parents a lot about this.
Yeah,
And
I'm sure.
going back to what you were saying about how our parents, sometimes in our families, we hear like, "Oh, it's better to be American than like our home country or whatever." When this book came out, my mom was so uncomfortable. She still is, I'm pretty sure, but she was like, "Why do you hate America?" And she like took it personally, like we gave
Yeah.
you this life, and I get it. I get why they would take it personally in a way, but I also was like, "But this isn't, like, about you," you know, I 'cause I feel like we're in the same position. So they live in LA, in SGV still, and
Mhm.
when ICE descended upon Los Angeles last summer, we had a lot of conversations about what that meant and what that looked like, and I think my parents were still under the impression of, like, "Oh, they're here to, like, get the criminals and the bad people," right?
Right.
And for me, it was thinking helping wanting to have a conversation with them about how, like, ultimately, the enemy is the state, and that even the construct of who is a criminal and who is not, trying to get them to think beyond, I think, like this binary sense of who's deserving and who's not deserving, which is often so baked into the racial politics of being Asian American, and helping them see that because we're actually all exploited, we actually all it would serve us to actually understand that we belong to each other and that we are safer with each other rather than aligning with the police or the state or the elite. That's a long process and a long conversation that I have with my parents. But I think just thinking beyond the state as a site of safety or as a solution.
Yeah, the state kind of being the default systems that exist already, right? And actually, I can relate this to micro examples that I hear of all the
Mhm.
time in people's day to day lives is that they are incredibly, let's say, like burnt out and feeling really like they don't matter at work, right? And they're working for, let's say, this big corporate office, and it's like the goal is not to do better in this system. The goal is to realize sometimes that your wellness and your well-being and your liberation and freedom is actually incompatible with your goals of being
Mm,
successful in the system, right? And that's a really hard realization, kind of like, for our parents' generations or first generation immigrants who did make the choice to come to America because it's kind
yeah.
of the pinnacle of, success or kind of the dream. And it is a lot to realize that this whole system actually does not serve who I am and is actually why I feel like I need to keep being on this hamster wheel, being good enough and being American enough and assimilating enough. Right. And yeah, like, and as you said, sometimes we need to just zoom out, like all the way out and refuse to consent to this system. And because
Mhm.
speaking about, thinking outside the system altogether, you write about your experiences of in the church, right? And how that
Mhm.
is a huge system. Your experience with trying to make change within that system first before realizing that that may be not the way to really achieve community and belonging,
Mhm.
right? And coming back to yourself. And I'd love to hear more from you about how you're able to reclaim your sense of self after, sharing the religious trauma that you experienced with the church and how you were able to just step outside that system.
Yeah. In the book, I have a chapter where I talk specifically about the Chinese immigrant church. And I don't know if people have experience with like ethnic immigrant churches here, but it's kind of like if you know, you know, it is its whole ecosystem. And I pose it as both an example of being unassimilable, this beautiful space where you can see people who look like you in leadership. You can preserve language and culture. And it becomes this like, in many ways, it does become this unassimilable space that thrives because it refuses to assimilate, right? Like services in so many different languages. But at the same time, from my experience, there were also a lot of colonial kind of logics around race, around deservedness, like we talked about earlier. There was a ton of spiritualized rhetoric around achievement and the model minority, a lot of like carceral logics too. And I'm talking from an evangelical point of view, but like evangelicalism can feel very carceral, right? Where it's like you commit a crime and you have to pay the price, and it
Yes.
actually isn't very restorative.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother like
Yeah.
conversation, and I write about it in the book. But anyways, I basically I got really burned from being really immersed in that space because I and a few comrades were trying to push our evangelical organization to become queer affirming. And we ended up all getting fired. And I think, yeah, it's interesting because I think it was my sole space of belonging for a long time. And I write about in the book, it was the first time like I was in a space where I felt affirmed, I think more in my ethnic and class identity. And it was just, it was a place where I felt like I could take leadership in a way that I couldn't in the outside world. Even though it was a church that didn't ordain women, right? Like there are all these contradictions. And so when that space felt like it was taken away from me, I felt like it was my friends, my community that I hadn't been with for some for about 5 years, but many for close to a decade. And so I would say how I'm reclaiming a sense of belonging. At the time, I knew I needed like a structured community like that, because that's what I was used to. And so I threw myself into community organizing, into ethnic studies. I joined this organization called PEP that like trained me to be an ethnic studies teacher in high school. I kind of joined that world of Asian American studies. And it was really so healing for me because it was a space where it was like, they want me to speak. When I was doing work in ministry and in Christian spaces, it was like every time I talked, I just felt like it was like surveillance or people would like roll their eye. Like people didn't want to hear from me anymore, I really internalized that. Was also maybe just like 25, 26 at that time. And so afterwards, when I went to an ethnic study space, a more organizing space, and a space that felt more politically and spiritually aligned, it was so healing because it was like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. There was something wrong with them actually and the space that I was in. And I was trying to like force myself to fit into this mold and it didn't work. So then I was trying to force them to fit into something that would work for me.
Mm.
But ultimately we were incompatible. But anyway, so I think like those spaces, those organizing spaces, those activist spaces really saved me. Ethnic studies really like healed me from that time. But since then, I yeah, I mean, a sense of self and belonging is constantly evolving. Spiritually, that has taken a lot of evolutions. For a long time after that, I just shut the door on like any kind of spirituality altogether. But now I'm kind of reopening up and like becoming open again to different practices, not to churches, but different practices. And then also, I think like sense of self also totally changed 3 years ago when I had a baby. That was
Mm.
also probably just as uprooting or even more uprooting. And so I think it's always just like there's always changes and evolutions that life requires of us. But yeah, that one is a big theme in the book.
I'm kind of hearing just like being more in tune with you at whatever changes you're going through at that point in life instead of sticking to like one system where there is a set right or wrong and a way to do things. It's like you're just being more in tune to how you're evolving in the moment, right? And when you become a
Yeah.
parent, that's vastly different than not being a parent. And then years into parenthood is different from being like a new parent. And yeah, just like you need to really be check in with you rather than an external source to see like what do you need, right? Like and
Yeah.
taking
Yeah.
care yeah, taking care of you and like reclaiming your sense of self by being like, no, I'm not good and I know that. I don't need anyone else to tell me that. And I can take care of and seek the support I need,
Yeah.
even if the kind of place that I'm really invested in and I really want support and will not give
Yeah.
it to me.
Yeah, and I think I kind of like had to relearn that lesson again this year. I mean, it was much faster for me to pick up on, thankfully, but I think like because I finished my PhD earlier and I went on the academic job market and it was just like a full slate of rejections. Okay. It was a terrible experience. But like I was reflecting and thinking about how that experience of being fully rejected from academia it actually felt really triggering and similar to when I felt excluded from my religious experience, in that in both situations, it kind of felt like my full self is not welcome or that there's something wrong with like my full self. But I think thankfully now with age and with different communities I'm part of, I know that I'm not the problem. I mean, of course I have issues and I will take accountability. I'm also in therapy, all those things. But like when it's something so drastic, and in both situations, I really have concluded it really was, I think, my activism that was incongruent with the institution,
Mhm,
that's not really a me problem.
mhm.
And I don't have and I shouldn't have to change my whole self and values. Of course, like there's real cost to that. Like, what am I
Absolutely.
going to do for work? What am I, like things like that. But I at least feel more empowered to be true to myself.
Actually, what you're saying really resonates with me because it's what a lot of clients kind of say when they feel ready to maybe to leave therapy or when they do feel like a
Mhm.
lot closer to who they are is that they do kind of say that like I don't necessarily have smaller problems or my problems are not different. I still live in the same environment that I do, but I'm more attuned to myself to know like how to get through that moment. Right. Like
Mhm.
and yeah, like it's just that is how you reclaim your sense of self is just really centering you and not the systems that demand us to center them, right? That by
Yeah.
default we are supposed to center. But it's
Yeah.
like, how do you take care of you knowing that we do live in these insane oppressive systems and that we have to still survive? And so we do, there are still things that we have to concede at the end of the day, but we also can recognize where we do have control in knowing who we are and
Mhm.
really being able to take care of ourselves, knowing that there are things outside of our control. But how are you taking care of yourself right now?
My friendships mean a lot to me. They always have, but I think prioritizing being with and talking with people where I don't have to explain, I don't have to perform has always been really important to me, and even more so lately. And so that might look like so last year when I went, I was doing a lot of traveling for the book. Like one thing I did was I made sure that at every stop I would have like safe people near me
Mhm.
to just kind of recharge. And yeah, so I think like those relationships are part of my self-care. I also, in the past year, started to be medicated, which has been a great thing for me. I was really intimidated to start, and I had been in talk therapy for like, I don't even know, like over 10 years. But it just felt like, I don't know, with the demands of having a toddler, with the existential crises, with just like the grueling, not just workload, but dehumanization of being a PhD student. Yeah, as I'm coming out of it now, I'm like, wow, the last few years have probably aged me and done a number on me. And so I think like, yeah, just trying to be in tune with those things to not feel like, "Oh, no, I need to, like, heal faster," or "I shouldn't have done this." Like, it is what it is. Again, being on Prozac has helped a lot, just, like, to feel like my baseline is a little bit more stable, and then just yeah, just other little things like, I joined a gym with my husband that has, childcare, which actually is low-key life-changing because like, we can do things for ourselves now during the week and trying to take care of my just like basic adult things, right? Like it feels like it should be so obvious and easy, but it's so hard. It's so hard to like eat healthy, go to sleep early, like those basic things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm working on.
The non-negotiables and taking care of yourself are, I
Yeah,
guess, the basics. But
yeah,
I do notice that the first thing you said is again your community. Or like the first thing that you kind of like turn to for like knowing that this is what I need to be okay is like your friends. Or like
yeah,
friends and Prozac
yeah,
and basic things like being active, right? Eating well, those things that we all know. But again, under Empire is very hard to achieve
yeah,
because we all have a million things to do and we're
yeah,
just always behind. So, yeah, I think that that's something that we, from time to time arrive at like, oh, yeah, hello, the basics. But again, we do live in so much pressure and demand. It's not normal. And so, I think that your answer resonates with a lot of us here. And before we open it up to everyone else with questions, my last question for you is what is the one thing you hope everyone knows?
I think one thing I've been thinking about is I've had like a recalibration of identity recently. So like I shared, I previously was I feel like a lot more active in my community and I've been going through this sense of like, oh, I'm not doing enough. These like capitalist logics, right? Of like the world is I'm not like donating enough, I'm not serving my community enough, I'm not sharing enough about this, I'm not talking enough about this. But I think this is more a message to myself of just like let like in it's a paradox, right? Like in one sense, we live in the imperial core, nothing will kind of ever be enough because we as Westerners like have exploited and plummeted the earth so much for our lifestyles. And at the same time, like what we're doing is enough and who we are is enough. And so just learning to hold that paradox of like, yes, it's so fucked. Like the violence is escalating. And like it doesn't help anyone to be more violent to ourselves and to demand more of ourselves. Like that's actually going to continue these cycles. And so really like committing to being in the long haul, which includes these rhythms of rest, taking breaks, making sure that I don't do so much, but actually take care of my basic physical needs so that I can be here in the long term for future generations is something different from how I used to operate, which was just like 100% all the time.
Mhm.
And I just felt like an expectation to do that, but that's just really not sustainable and very kind of like internally self-harmful too to demand that much of myself.
Yeah. It's kinda reminds me what you were saying earlier is like, well, how can you're still operating within this system of perfectionism or kind of being enough, doing enough, but, it's the system that's burning you out, right? It's the system and
Yeah.
trying to maintain it and trying to be juggle everything all at once that kinda keeps you in that loop of feeling like you're not doing enough or good enough. And I kind of hear you saying that it's okay. Like, it's okay if you feel like it's not enough. Like,
Mm,
maybe that's just a feeling that we need to be okay with and know that
mm,
that's just how it is under empire and under
yeah.
these insane oppressive systems, that it's normal, if anything, and it's nice to know that we're not alone in feeling that way. Right, like,
Yeah.
and knowing that, yeah, it's hard to do the basic things even, like
Yeah.
take care of the basics, and it's hard to the hardest thing is to make room for all of these conflicting feelings, right?
Mm,
Like, I wanna do more, I see suffering, and I wanna be a part of, like, positive change, and I can't even, get out of bed. Like, I can't
yeah.
even take care of myself today. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
hear you just, like, making room for whatever comes up and, looking for really, like, your well-being long term, right? Like, kind of
Yeah.
what is sustainable for you, and
Yeah.
being okay with knowing that you're allowed to take care of yourself and you're allowed to
Yeah.
just make sure you're good.
Yeah. Yeah. You're so validating. It's great talking to a therapist. Having a therapist moderate this. I love it.
Thank you so much for answering my question, but for now, I will go ahead and open it up to everyone, but thank you so much, Bianca, for answering all my questions.
You.